The year is 1347, and while most of Europe is waking up to another day of feudal farming and praying, lose a fortune before most people have even had breakfast. His one man in Lübeck is about to make ord he's not a knight, not a nobleman, name is Heinrich Gottschalk, and definitely not a priest. He's something far more dangerous to the old order, a merchant. And today, like every day, he's gambling with numbers that would make modern-day traders sweat through their silk shirts. You might think medieval commerce was all handshakes and honest dealing, but Heinrich's world was cutthroat capitalism, wrapped in religious ceremony. Every transaction could bankrupt you, every partnership might be your last, and every ship that left port carried someone's entire life savings into the unknown. Welcome to the Hanseatic League, where money talked louder than prayers, and a good ledger book was worth more than a castle. The Hanseatic League wasn't just some trading club for rich guys in funny hats. It was a commercial empire that stretched from London to Novgorod, controlling everything from Baltic herring to Flemish cloth. These merchants didn't conquer territories with swords. They conquered markets with contracts, and their weapon of choice wasn't steel. It was the most terrifying thing medieval Europe had ever seen: organized bookkeeping. Heinrich rolls out of his narrow bed on Breite Strasse just as the cathedral bells announce dawn. No sleeping in when you're playing with other people's money. The air in his timber-framed house carries the smell of salt, tar, and opportunity, or disaster, depending on how today's deals go down. His first stop isn't breakfast or prayers, it's the numbers. Every successful merchant in Lübeck starts their day the same way, checking what they owned yesterday against what they might lose today. The ledger book on his oak table tells a story more dramatic than any knight's romance. Column after column of figures representing stockfish from Bergen, beeswax from Novgorod, and fustian cloth from Flanders. But these aren't just inventory numbers. They're Heinrich's entire world reduced to marks on parchment. One miscalculation, one bad voyage, one dishonest partner, and those neat little numbers could spell complete ruin. Here's what makes Heinrich's morning routine fascinating. He's not just counting his own money. Medieval merchants operated on a credit system so complex it would make modern banking look simple. Heinrich might own half a shipment of honey, owe money on 3 barrels of tar, have credit coming from a wool deal in England, and be responsible for someone else's stockfish that hasn't even left Bergen yet. Keeping track of all this required mathematical skills that most university scholars couldn't match. The real kicker is the risk calculation. Every entry in that ledger represents a bet against weather, pirates, politics, and human nature. That shipment of amber from the Baltic. It might be sitting at the bottom of the sea by now. Those furs from Novgorod. They could be rotting in a warehouse if the political situation went south. Heinrich doesn't just track what he owns. He tracks the probability of still owning it next week. By the time most people are stumbling toward their morning chores, Heinrich is already dressed and heading toward the market square, with a mind full of numbers and a purse full of silver coins. The Lübeck market at dawn wasn't some quaint medieval fair. It was the nerve centre of Northern European commerce, where fortunes were made and lost before most people finished their morning prayers. The first stop is the stockfish stalls, where dried cod from Norway is stacked higher than a man's head. You might think dried fish is dried fish, but Heinrich knows better. The quality variations could mean the difference between a profitable voyage and financial disaster. Norwegian stockfish from the Lofoten Islands commanded premium prices, while inferior fish from other regions might not even cover shipping costs. Heinrich runs his fingers along the fish, checking for the right texture, the proper colour, the telltale signs that separate merchant-grade stockfish from the garbage that desperate sellers try to pass off on inexperienced buyers. But here's where it gets really interesting. Heinrich isn't just buying fish, he's buying futures. Most of this stockfish won't stay in Lübeck. It's destined for markets in Flanders, England, or the German interior. He's calculating not just the current price, but what these fish will be worth in 6 months, when they reach their final destination. It's like playing chess with commodity prices, except the board keeps changing and your opponent might be a storm in the North Sea. The negotiation process itself was an art form that would put modern corporate lawyers to shame. Every price had to factor in guild regulations, city taxes, transportation costs, insurance premiums, and currency fluctuations. Heinrich couldn't just say, "I'll take 50 barrels at 2 marks each." He had to navigate a maze of rules that specified everything from acceptable barrel sizes to quality standards to payment schedules. The Lübeck Fish Guild had regulations thicker than the Bible, and breaking them could get you banned from the market permanently. There were rules about who could sell what, when they could sell it, how it had to be measured, and what constituted fair dealing. Heinrich had to know every regulation by heart, because ignorance wasn't just expensive, it was career-ending. Next comes the wax inspection, where Heinrich's expertise really shines. Medieval Europe ran on beeswax almost as much as it ran on grain. Churches needed it for candles, scribes needed it for sealing documents, and households used it for everything from waterproofing to medicine. But wax quality varied dramatically depending on its source, and the price differences were enormous. Russian wax from Novgorod was considered the gold standard, pure and clean, with that distinctive pale color that commanded top prices. Polish wax was decent but darker, while local German wax often contained impurities that made it suitable only for basic applications. Heinrich examines each block like a jeweler studying diamonds, checking for color consistency, testing the texture, even smelling it to detect any contamination. The real challenge is predicting demand. Church construction was booming across Northern Europe, which meant massive orders for high-quality candle wax. But political tensions between various kingdoms could shut down trade routes overnight, leaving Heinrich with warehouses full of expensive wax and no way to sell it. He's not just buying wax, he's betting on the stability of medieval politics. The fustian cloth inspection requires yet another set of skills entirely. This thick cotton fabric from Flanders was the backbone of middle-class clothing across Northern Europe. But quality control in medieval textile production was about as reliable as the weather. Heinrich has to spot weaving flaws that could make entire bolts of cloth unsellable, check for consistent dye colors, and verify that the measurements match what the sellers claim. What makes this morning routine truly remarkable isn't the individual transactions. It's how Heinrich processes information that would overwhelm most people. He's simultaneously tracking inventory levels, price trends, political developments, weather patterns, and currency fluctuations across a dozen different markets. Every decision affects every other decision, creating a web of interconnected risks that would challenge modern computer models. The morning market inspection isn't just shopping, it's intelligence gathering on an international scale. Heinrich talks to other merchants, ship captains, and traveling craftsmen, picking up rumors about grain harvests in Poland, political tensions in Denmark, or pirate activity in the Baltic. This information is as valuable as any commodity because it helps him predict where prices are heading and which routes might be dangerous. By mid-morning, Heinrich has filled his preliminary shopping list, but the real work is just beginning. Those barrels of stockfish and blocks of wax represent raw materials for the complex financial machinery that keeps medieval commerce moving. Now comes the part that separates successful merchants from bankrupt dreamers, turning those physical goods into profitable ventures across an unpredictable and dangerous medieval world. The city scale house is where Heinrich's morning transforms from shopping expedition to high-stakes mathematics. This isn't your neighborhood grocery store scale. It's a massive bronze contraption that could weigh a full-grown ox and determine the fate of entire merchant houses. Every bag, barrel, and bale has to pass through here, and the city weighmaster treats his job like he's guarding the crown jewels, which in a way, he is. Here's where medieval commerce gets absolutely brutal. Weight fraud was everywhere. Sellers would soak grain to make it heavier, mix sand with spices, or use barrels with false bottoms. Heinrich has seen merchants lose everything because they trusted the wrong supplier's measurements. The city scale was supposed to be neutral ground, but even here, a few silver coins in the right palm could make £100 barrel suddenly weigh 110. Heinrich watches like a hawk as his stockfish barrels roll onto the weighing platform. Each barrel should contain exactly 200 pounds of fish, but medieval barrel making wasn't exactly precision engineering. Some barrels were thicker, some were thinner, and the difference could eat into his profit margins faster than termites in ship wood. The weighmaster calls out the numbers in a voice that carries across the square, and Heinrich does rapid mental calculations that would impress a university mathematician. But weight is only half the story. Moisture content could turn premium stockfish into expensive fish jerky, and there was no way to test it until you opened the barrel. Heinrich has learned to read the subtle signs: how the wood looks, whether the barrel sounds hollow when tapped, even how it smells. One batch of seemingly perfect stockfish from Bergen had arrived so waterlogged that it rotted within a week. That mistake cost Heinrich's previous partnership 2 years' worth of profits. The wax weighing is even trickier because different types of wax had different densities. A block of pure Russian beeswax weighed differently than the same size block of lower-grade Polish wax, and the price per pound reflected those differences. Heinrich has to verify not just the weight, but the purity, because unscrupulous dealers mix cheap tallow with expensive beeswax to boost their profits. The only way to catch this fraud was experience, and Heinrich had learned the hard way that trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. Guild regulations controlled every aspect of these transactions, and breaking them meant more than just fines. The Cloth Merchants Guild had specific rules about measuring fustian. It had to be measured in standard ells, stretched but not pulled, and inspected in proper daylight to check for flaws. Heinrich watches the guild inspector examine each bolt of cloth like a scholar reading scripture, looking for the tiny flaws that could render expensive fabric worthless. The mathematics behind all this would make modern accountants weep. Heinrich isn't just buying goods, he's calculating profit margins across multiple currencies, factoring in transportation costs that vary with weather and politics, and estimating demand in markets he might not reach for months. Every transaction involves at least 6 different fees: the purchase price, city weighing fees, guild inspection costs, storage charges, transportation deposits, and insurance premiums. Here's what makes Heinrich's calculations truly impressive. He's doing all this math in his head while negotiating in multiple languages with people who would cheerfully bankrupt him if given the chance. The stockfish dealer speaks Low German with a Bergen accent thick enough to cut with a knife. The wax merchant conducts business in a mixture of Latin and Flemish. The cloth inspector insists on using the old Lübeck measures that haven't been standardized with the rest of the Hanseatic League. Currency exchange adds another layer of complexity that would challenge modern financial experts. Heinrich's purse contains silver marks from Lübeck, groschens from Prague, sterling coins from England, and ducats from Venice. Each has a different silver content, and the exchange rates fluctuate based on political situations he might not hear about for weeks. Paying for Norwegian stockfish with English sterling might save money or cost a fortune, depending on the latest news from the royal courts. The real artistry comes in structuring deals that spread risk across multiple partners and voyages. Heinrich rarely buys anything outright. Instead, he creates partnerships where different merchants share costs and profits. This barrel of high-grade stockfish might be owned 1/3 by Heinrich, 1/3 by a merchant in Hamburg, and 1/3 by a ship captain who's providing transportation. If the shipment arrives safely, everyone profits. If it sinks, everyone loses. But no single person faces complete ruin. These partnership agreements require paperwork that would make modern lawyers proud. Every detail has to be spelled out. Who pays for what? How profits get divided? What happens if the cargo is damaged? Who's responsible if political situations shut down trade routes? Heinrich carries a leather satchel filled with contracts. each one representing a different gamble on medieval commerce's unpredictable future. But the morning's most crucial decision isn't about what to buy, it's about timing. Heinrich has been tracking weather patterns, political developments, and seasonal demand cycles to determine the perfect moment to commit his capital. Buy too early, and his money sits idle while prices might drop. Buy too late, and the best merchandise gets snapped up by competitors, or the sailing season ends before he can move his goods. The information network that guides these decisions rivals anything modern intelligence agencies could assemble. Heinrich maintains contacts in every major Hanseatic port, from Bergen to Novgorod to London. These aren't just business associates. They're his eyes and ears in markets hundreds of miles away. A message from his factor in Bergen about poor fishing conditions could triple the value of the stockfish Heinrich bought this morning. News from his partner in Bruges about increased demand for wax could turn a modest investment into a goldmine. By late morning, Heinrich has committed significant capital to 3 different ventures, but his work is just beginning. Those physical goods need to be transformed into profitable shipments, and that requires navigating the most complex financial machinery medieval Europe had ever created. The real test of Heinrich's skills isn't buying merchandise. It's turning those purchases into successful voyages that will return enough profit to justify the enormous risks he's taking. The contour awaits, where contracts become reality and where Heinrich's morning purchases either launch him toward prosperity or drag him down into the kind of debt that destroys merchant dynasties forever. The contour isn't some fancy medieval office building. It's the beating heart of Hanseatic commerce, where Heinrich's morning purchases get transformed into complex financial instruments that would make Wall Street traders dizzy. Think of it as the world's first multinational corporation headquarters, except instead of glass and steel, it's timber and determination, and instead of computer screens, it's parchment and prayers that your partners don't rob you blind. Heinrich pushes through the heavy oak doors into a world that buzzes with more energy than a beehive on market day. The main hall stretches out like a cathedral dedicated to commerce, with merchant desks arranged in precise rows and clerks scurrying between them carrying documents that represent fortunes won and lost. The air smells like ink, sealing wax, and the kind of nervous sweat that comes from gambling with other people's money. The first order of business is finding partners for Heinrich's morning purchases, because no smart merchant in 1347 puts all his eggs in one basket, especially when that basket might end up at the bottom of the Baltic Sea. Partnership formation in the medieval world was like speed dating, except instead of looking for romance, you're looking for someone trustworthy enough to share financial ruin with. Heinrich approaches the partnership board, a massive wooden display where merchants post notices seeking investors or offering to invest in other ventures. Here's where medieval finance gets absolutely fascinating. Heinrich can't just throw money at any opportunity that looks promising. The guild regulations specify exactly who can partner with whom, what percentage shares are acceptable, and how profits must be divided. A master merchant can partner with other masters, but partnering with someone below your guild rank requires special permissions and higher fees. It's like a medieval credit rating system, except your rating depends more on family connections and guild standing than actual financial performance. The mathematics behind partnership formation would challenge modern actuaries. Heinrich's stockfish purchase this morning needs to be divided among at least 3 partners to spread the risk properly. Too many partners, and the profit margins get eaten up by administrative costs and conflicting interests. Too few partners, and a single disaster could wipe out everyone involved. Heinrich has calculated that his optimal partnership structure involves owning 40% himself, finding one major partner for 30%, and dividing the remaining 30% among 2 smaller investors. But finding the right partners requires intelligence gathering that would impress modern corporate espionage operations. Heinrich can't just trust someone's word about their financial stability. He needs to verify their current commitments, check their reputation in other markets, and assess their risk tolerance. The merchant sitting across from him might look prosperous, but Heinrich knows he lost 2 ships last season and is desperately trying to recoup his losses with increasingly risky ventures. The negotiation process itself is pure theatre. Everyone knows everyone else's financial situation, but nobody admits to knowing anything. Heinrich discusses his stockfish venture with Gottfried Zimmermann, a Hamburg merchant who's been operating in the Baltic trade for 15 years. Gottfried acts interested, but not too interested, because showing enthusiasm drives up the partnership cost. Heinrich pretends his stockfish is just one of many investment opportunities, when actually it represents a significant portion of his available capital. The real art comes in structuring the deal to protect everyone's interests while maximizing profit potential. Heinrich and Gottfried agree that Gottfried will take a 30% share in exchange for providing transportation on his cog, the St. Peter, and handling the sale in Bruges. But the contract has to specify what happens if the ship is delayed, if the cargo gets damaged, if political situations shut down the Bruges market, or if Gottfried decides to sell in a different port where he might get better prices. These contracts weren't simple handshake deals. They were legal documents that could hold up in Hanseatic courts across Northern Europe. Every clause had to be carefully worded because medieval law was full of loopholes that unscrupulous merchants exploited regularly. Heinrich has seen partnerships destroyed because someone interpreted best efforts to sell differently than everyone else intended. The paperwork for a single stockfish venture might run to several pages of dense Latin legal terminology. Currency arrangements add another layer of complexity that would give modern bankers nightmares. Heinrich's partners might be paying in different currencies. The final sale might be in yet another currency, and the exchange rates could shift dramatically during the months it takes to complete the venture. They have to agree not just on profit-sharing percentages, but on which exchange rates to use and when to calculate the conversions. A strong English sterling could turn a modest profit into a windfall, while a weak Flemish groat could eat up margins faster than shipworms attacking hull planks. The surety system represents medieval risk management at its most sophisticated. Heinrich can't just trust that his partners will fulfill their obligations. He needs guarantees backed by real assets. Gottfried puts up his house on Königstrasse as surety for his transportation obligations. Heinrich pledges his wax inventory as guarantee that he'll deliver his share of the stockfish on schedule. These sureties create a web of mutual dependence that keeps everyone honest, or at least makes dishonesty extremely expensive. But the most crucial element of any partnership is the exit strategy, because medieval commerce was unpredictable enough that even the best planned ventures could go sideways. Heinrich insists on clauses that specify exactly how the partnership dissolves if things go wrong. If the St. Peter sinks, who pays for the loss? If Gottfried gets a better offer for the cargo in Hamburg, can he break the Bruges agreement? If Heinrich needs to liquidate his share early, what's the buyout procedure? The afternoon brings Heinrich's attention to the loading process, where theory meets brutal reality, and where careful planning either succeeds spectacularly or fails catastrophically. The St. Peter sits in Lübeck's harbour like a floating warehouse, its hold carefully designed to maximise cargo capacity while maintaining the ship's seaworthiness. Loading a medieval cog wasn't like backing a truck up to a loading dock. It was more like solving a three-dimensional puzzle, where one wrong move could sink your investment. The stow plan that Heinrich and Gottfried develop would impress modern shipping engineers. Every barrel, every bale, every box has to be positioned not just for maximum space efficiency, but for proper weight distribution and cargo protection. The heaviest items go in the bottom of the hold, but not so heavy that they crack the hull planks. The most valuable goods need protection from water damage, but they also need to be accessible if customs officials want to inspect them. Fragile items require cushioning, but not so much cushioning that you waste valuable cargo space. Heinrich's stockfish barrels present their own unique challenges. Each barrel weighs over 200 pounds when fully loaded, and they need to be positioned so they don't shift during rough weather. A barrel that breaks free during a storm doesn't just damage its own contents, it becomes a battering ram that can destroy everything else in the hold. The St. Peter's crew uses a complex system of wooden braces, rope netting, and strategic placement to create what's essentially a cargo puzzle that stays locked together even when the ship is rolling through North Sea swells. Ballast calculation requires mathematical precision that would challenge modern naval architects. The St. Peter needs enough ballast to remain stable, but not so much that it reduces profitable cargo capacity. Too little ballast, and the ship becomes top-heavy and dangerous in rough weather. Too much ballast, and Heinrich's profit margins get squeezed by reduced cargo space. The ship's master calculates ballast requirements based on cargo weight, expected weather conditions, and the planned route, making adjustments that could mean the difference between a successful voyage and a maritime disaster. Protection from moisture represents one of medieval shipping's greatest challenges, because a single leak could turn valuable cargo into expensive garbage. Heinrich's stockfish might survive some dampness, but his wax would be ruined, and his fustian cloth could rot completely. The St. Peter's hold is lined with thick canvas treated with tar, and each type of cargo gets additional protection based on its vulnerability. The wax blocks are wrapped in oiled leather, the cloth bales are sealed in waterproof covers, and even the stockfish barrels get additional coatings to prevent contamination. The loading process itself resembles a carefully choreographed dance performed by people who know that one mistake could cost them their livelihoods. Heinrich supervises every barrel that goes into the hold, checking that his stockfish is positioned correctly and protected adequately. The ship's crew handles the physical loading, but Heinrich maintains final authority over his cargo placement. He's seen too many merchants lose everything because they trusted someone else to care about their investment as much as they did. Convoy timing adds the final element of strategic planning to Heinrich's afternoon preparations. The St. Peter won't sail alone. It will join a convoy of merchant vessels that provides mutual protection against pirates and shared navigation expertise. But convoy schedules depend on weather, politics, and the readiness of other merchants. Heinrich has to balance the safety of convoy travel against the costs of delays and the risk that market conditions might change while he's waiting for departure. The letters Heinrich prepares for his factors abroad represent his lifeline to distant markets and his only means of controlling his investment once it leaves Lübeck. These aren't casual business correspondence, they're detailed instructions that cover every contingency Heinrich can imagine. His factor in Bruges needs to know not just what prices to accept, but what to do if political situations change, how to handle currency fluctuations, and when to liquidate the cargo even at a loss rather than risk total failure. As the afternoon sun begins to set over Lübeck's harbour, Heinrich faces the moment of truth that every medieval merchant dreaded and anticipated in equal measure, closing the books on his day's investments and calculating whether his gambles have positioned him for prosperity or disaster. The ledger book that Heinrich opens as twilight settles over Lübeck isn't just a record of transactions, it's a mathematical battlefield where profit and loss wage war with numbers that could make or break merchant dynasties. Every entry represents a calculated risk. Every column tells a story of medieval capitalism at its most ruthless. And every sum could determine whether Heinrich ends this day richer or closer to the kind of debt that destroys families for generations. The accounting system Heinrich uses would make modern bookkeepers weep with frustration and admiration. Double-entry bookkeeping hasn't been invented yet, so Heinrich tracks his investments using a method that's part art, part science, and part desperate prayer to whatever saint protects merchants from their own stupidity. Each purchase gets recorded not just once, but multiple times across different sections of his ledger, creating a web of cross-references that helps him spot errors before they become catastrophes. Here's where medieval accounting gets absolutely brutal. Heinrich has to track not just what he spent today, but what those expenditures might be worth in 6 months when his cargo reaches its destination. That stockfish he bought this morning for 12 marks per barrel could be worth 20 marks in Bruges, or it could be worth 8 marks if the market gets flooded with competing shipments. Heinrich's ledger includes columns for purchase price, expected transportation costs, estimated duties and fees, projected selling price, and something he calls the disaster margin, extra costs he might face if everything goes wrong. The mathematics behind these calculations would challenge university scholars. Heinrich bought 15 barrels of stockfish at 12 marks each, totaling 180 marks. But that's just the beginning of his cost calculation. Transportation on the St. Peter costs 2 marks per barrel, adding 30 marks. Bruges market fees will run another 15 marks. Insurance premiums add 12 marks more. Currency exchange could cost him anywhere from 5 to 20 marks, depending on how exchange rates shift during the voyage. His total investment might range from 242 marks to 257 marks, and that's assuming nothing goes wrong. But Heinrich's real genius shows in how he structures his risk calculations. He doesn't just estimate one possible outcome, he creates what he calls the 3 futures: the good voyage, the normal voyage, and the disaster voyage. In the good future, his stockfish sells for 22 marks per barrel in Bruges, generating 330 marks in revenue against his maximum cost of 257 marks for a profit of 73 marks. Not bad for a morning's work. The normal voyage scenario assumes his stockfish sells for 18 marks per barrel, generating 270 marks in revenue. After subtracting his average costs of 249 marks, Heinrich would earn 21 marks profit, enough to justify the risk, but not enough to get excited about. This is the outcome he plans for, the baseline that determines whether this venture makes financial sense. The disaster scenario keeps Heinrich awake at night. If political troubles shut down the Bruges market, if his cargo gets damaged in transport, if currency fluctuations work against him, or if competing shipments flood the market, his stockfish might sell for only 10 marks per barrel. That generates 150 marks in revenue against costs that could still reach 240 marks or more, creating a loss of 90 marks or worse. This is the nightmare that turns successful merchants into beggars. What makes Heinrich's risk management truly sophisticated is how he calculates the probability of each scenario. He maintains detailed records of previous voyages, tracking how often each type of disaster actually occurs. Based on 5 years of data, Heinrich estimates that good voyages happen about 30% of the time. Normal voyages occur 50% of the time, and disasters strike 20% of the time. These probabilities let him calculate his expected return, a weighted average that suggests this venture should generate about 38 marks profit on average. But averages don't pay for Heinrich's house or feed his family. The real question is whether he can survive the disasters when they happen, and that requires maintaining enough capital reserves to absorb occasional losses. Heinrich's rule is simple: never commit more than 40% of his available capital to any single venture, no matter how promising it looks. Today's stockfish investment represents 35% of his current assets, leaving him with enough reserves to weather 1 or 2 disasters without facing complete ruin. The Wax and Fustian investments follow similar calculations, but with different risk profiles that create what Heinrich calls a balanced portfolio. The wax venture has lower potential profits, but also lower disaster risk, because wax demand remains relatively stable across different markets. The Fustian cloth offers higher profit margins, but carries greater risk from fashion changes and political disruptions that could shut down trade routes. By combining all 3 investments, Heinrich reduces his overall risk while maintaining decent profit potential. As the last light fades over Lübeck's harbour and Heinrich closes his ledger, the numbers tell their story. 247 marks invested, potential profits ranging from 68 marks to complete disaster, and a man's entire future riding on weather patterns he can't control, and partners he has to trust. This wasn't just medieval commerce. This was capitalism in its rawest form, where every transaction could make you rich or destroy you completely. Heinrich's day reveals something remarkable. These weren't simple traders bartering goods at country fairs. They were sophisticated financiers running complex international operations that would impress modern investment banks. The mathematics, the risk management, the partnership structures, all of it emerged from the brutal necessity of survival in a world where one bad decision could end your bloodline's prosperity forever. Tomorrow, Heinrich will wake up and do it all over again, because that's what it took to build the commercial empire that connected medieval Europe. The